Okay, everyone, welcome to another random walk down Mill Street. Tonight's topic has to do with safrut, has to do with scribal techniques in Judaism, and it's a little bit esoteric to some, but I think it's interesting, and I hope you'll learn something from it. And so I'm going to share my screen and get right to it. Okay, just making sure you can see my screen. Yes. Okay, good. I did it right. So I titled this presentation called "Say Velmed," or if your other versions of the Haggadah will appoint it "Say Ulmad," but in the one that we use, it's "Say Velmed." You'll see why later. But scribal customs and corrections in historic Torah scrolls of Shearith Israel. So many of you know that Shearith Israel, being a historic synagogue, has many Sifrei Torah. In fact, we have 51 Sifrei Torah. They're not all kasher, but a lot of Sifrei Torah. And many of them are historic. Being a congregation that's been around for 300 plus years, we have a lot of Sifrei Torah that are old. And our Sifrei Torah reflect the large diversity of our congregation. We have Sifrei Torah from Iraq, we have Sifrei Torah from Egypt, we have Sifrei Torah from Amsterdam. Most of the largest one place that our Sifrei Torah come from are Amsterdam, as you might expect with the Portuguese synagogue that we are. But we also have many Ashkenazic Sifrei Torah from Eastern Europe, from Western Europe. We have Sifrei Torah from Shanghai. And so you get the sense that we have a very large number of diverse Sifrei Torah. So modern and old. And I don't know, there's sort of I wouldn't call it a myth exactly, but a misconception by laymen that all Sifrei Torah are the same. Because Sifrei Torah are remarkably close to each other. Considering the long history of the Bible, it's quite amazing that over the course of, 2,000 years, all the Sifrei Torah in synagogues today are almost identical. They're very, very similar to one another. And the reason that is directly related to the care with which the Masoretes took to transmit our Torah texts, and which the rabbis followed over the course of the centuries until today. That being said, Torah scrolls are not all identical. Not in their spellings of words, but there are certain known differences. I think there's 9 differences between most scrolls and Temani scrolls. There's some famous words that are spelt one way in Ashkenaz and a different way in Sepharad. There are some words that are spelt Malay and Chaser. Not so many considering the size of the Torah, but there are some. But there are also differences in other ways. And one of those most obvious ways is the type of text, the handwriting, the scribal text, paleography, you might say, the way that the words are written. So I want to show you here, by the way, while I was searching around the internet, I was looking for a good quote of this sort of misconception, and I found an online question which was answered by sort of this online yeshiva kind of place, and it was talking about differences in Torah scrolls, and it says all Torah scrolls are exactly identical, otherwise they're not kasher. Okay, not that fine. Just to give you a sense of the misconceptions that we're going to go through. But if you look here, these are mostly modern scripts for writing Sifrei Torah. And I want to show you a few things here. One is what's called Ktav Beit Yosef, that you see here up in the upper right. And this is actually what most Ashkenazic Sifrei Torah look like today. And some things to note is the way the Chet is written, the way the Fei is written here, with this sort of bet that's inside the Fei, and the sort of angular nature of it. Take a look at the shin, the way it comes to a point here. These are modern Beit Yosef script. If you go to any sofer today who is writing an Ashkenazic style, it's going to be almost exactly like this, unless they are writing Hasidic style, which would be the Datari here, which has a few differences, not major. And the other is what's called the Alter Rebbe Ktav, which I didn't even bother showing to you, which has lots of angular little parts to it. Hasidic Sofrim often write in that style. And the other major style is Sephardic. Now, of course, like most things, Ashkenazim tend to just lump all Sephardic styles of handwriting together, and they call them Velish, which has a whole history of the word itself. It actually is related to the English word for Welsh, but basically means foreign, because it was foreign to the Ashkenazim in the 18th century or so, and they called the Sephardic Ktav Velish. And here's an example of what most of Sephardic scribal handwritings would look like today. But the truth is, there are a lot of differences between Iraqi Sifrei Torah and Turkish Sifrei Torah and Sifrei Torah that come from North Africa, Portuguese Sifrei Torah, Taimani Sifrei Torah. They're all different. But one of the major things, if you're ever wondering, there's a few things that you can always look at to sort of tell. And one of them is the way the Aleph goes. So Ashkenazi Sifrei Torah, the Aleph has this bends to the right. Sephardic Sifrei Torah, the Aleph, it's hard to see from this little picture, but it has a foot going to the left. There are other things that you can look at too. The Say here has this angular stuff in the Ashkenazi one. The Sephardic ones don't. Other things too, but that's just to tell that you can sort of generally categorize. Now, the other thing is you can do, which we're not going to talk too much about now, is you can sort of identify the location of origin and sometimes the date of origin by the style of writing, because the way that the letters have been written have changed over time. Not really where I want to center. I just want to make you aware of that. So we had a sofer named Rabbi Yitzhak Goldstein come from Israel, from a place called Machon Ot, who inventoried our Sefarim, and he gave an estimate on the place of origin and era of origin based on the Ktav of all the different Sefarim, which was very useful and taught me a lot about our Torah scrolls here in Shearith, Israel. Another thing I want you to know is that in writing of Torah scrolls and tefillin and mezuzah, certain letters are supposed to be crowned with tagin. And you see them here. This is Shatnez Gat. These are letters that have 3 tagin on them, and then there are letters that have 1 tag on it, and then there are letters that have no crowns on them at all. And that is the general methodology. You'll see that in Sifrei Torah, Mezuzah, and Tefillin. If a sofer is writing a ketubah, if a sofer is writing a get, there is no reason to use tagin. Sometimes they do anyway, but there's no requirement to, and often they do not have such adornments. Okay, all of this is sort of by way of just telling you some of the differences between scrolls. Scrolls are not identical. They have different ways of writing. They have different ways of being crowned and things like that. Now, in Shearith Israel, a number of years ago, we had, before the pandemic, I think it was around 2019, we had a project, Sefer Torah project, maybe it was 2018, I don't remember exactly when it was, but we wanted to restore, it was part of a fundraiser and part of a lecture series that the rabbi was giving, but we wanted to restore a historic Sefer Torah to use as sort of something that we were doing together with this project. And we had to decide what Sefer Torah to restore. So we had a congregant who was very close with a well-known sofer from Baltimore, Ner Yisrael, Ashkenazi sofer, but very well-known in the Safrut world. And someone who was very experienced, very, very experienced. So he came here, and we thought, okay, we are going to go through some of the likely contenders of these old Sifarim and find one that is kasherable, something that isn't too poorly in too poor of a condition to fix, so that we could do it with this project that we were doing. So we showed him all these some of the likely contenders. Rabbi Rode was very helpful. He had pulled out a couple of different scrolls, and when it was during the course of that day, we showed him a series of Gevil Sifrei Torah. Gevil is Gevil is like leather, soft parchment that has, cowhide that has been treated to make it soft and pliable, which is the way that Sifrei Torah are meant to be written according to the Talmud. But already a long time ago, probably in medieval days already, that technique was lost in Ashkenaz and in Europe. And so really only Sephardic Sifrei Torah to this day retain this Gevil tradition. And most other Sifrei Torah are written on something called cloth, parchment. You've probably seen it. You've probably seen a mezuzah is written on parchment, and Sifrei Torah written on parchment, which is also treated differently. It's more stiff. It's more hard. It's whitewashed and bleached, unlike these brown Sifrei Torah. Now, Ashkenazi Sofarim and modern day Sofarim don't encounter Gevil too frequently. They don't find it much. In fact, I think for a long time, in the last 20, 30 years, you couldn't even get Gevil. Now I've heard that you can acquire Gevil if you want to write a Megillah in Gevil, you can do it. But for a long time, that was really not possible. So this Sofer comes and he takes a look at our Sefarim. And he's looking at these Gevil Sifrei Torah. And one of the ones we wanted to look at was one of these, like this one on the side here. This is actually an old Sefer Torah from North Africa, from Morocco. And we thought maybe it was a candidate for repair. And he's looking at it, talking to Rabbi Rode, saying, well, maybe I could do it, but I'd have to fix every lamed in the whole Torah. Why? Because this is the way the lameds were written in that tradition. But modern day Sofarim don't write lameds like this. They write lameds like this, at least in the Ashkenazic world. And the Sephardic world is not so different. And that comes from the way Sofarim are taught today, which are using modern day halachic works, which give very specific rules about how to write the letters, which have a tradition that come from an earlier period. They're not from nowhere, but they're very machmir about the form of the letters. So here, just in translation, comes from Mishnah Berurah. You can look it up. You can look it up in the original if you're really interested. It says for the letter lamed, its neck should be long like a vav, and should be rounded on the top and squared on the left, as you see here, and then it goes down to make a chaf here. So you have a vav on top of a chaf. That's the way it's supposed to be. And the sofer that we brought says, well, that's not happening when these, I'd have to fix every single lamed in the whole sefer. So Rabbi Rode thought about it for a little bit and said, he said, thank you very much, but you're not the sofer for us. We're not looking to change the ktav of a Torah scroll. And you'll see why I'm talking about this in a little bit, but on the other hand, I want to show you that some Sofarim, including the ones that we ultimately went with, are very conscious that the style of writing has changed over time. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this, but there is in many synagogues around the world have received Sifrei Torah coming from London that were once part of something called the Czech Memorial Trust. During World War II, the Nazis collected Sifrei Torah that were in Moravia and Czechoslovakia, and after the war, they found a huge, huge, huge stash of Sifrei Torah that had been collected before the war or from all these different synagogues and brought to, I think, Prague, and after World War II, they had this huge number, thousands of Sifrei Torah, which were then sent to England and sort of sat in storage. And then a project was developed to make them kasher, maybe some of them were kasher, and send them to communities that could use them. They shouldn't sit unused. And so that project continues to this day. There are Sofrim who train and go there and work on repairing these or fixing them or making them presentable and sending them to communities around the world. And you may have seen them in the lobby of a synagogue. Oh, the Czech Memorial, so there's a Holocaust Torah, as they call it, things like that. So that to do that work, if you are a sofer who wants to do that work, there are certain rules. And one of them I really like, and it's here on the bottom. And that's rule number 3. To recognize the integrity of the scroll is paramount. And that the sofer will neither add, change, nor remove signs, embellishments, or visual style to or from the scroll. Every effort will be used to maintain the integrity of the scroll, keeping the same writing style, the ink color, the thickness, the stitching, etc. You get the idea. So some soferim want to change everything to make it kasher, and some soferim want to make it as authentic to its own time as possible. Okay. Now, there are some other things that are interesting that have changed over time. If you look at a Sefer Torah that's written today by a sofer, you go to a sofer, you want to buy a Torah. You go to a Judaic store and say, you know what, I've got some money put away. I'd like to buy a Sefer Torah, or you're an institution that wants to buy a Sefer Torah, and you're getting a new Sefer Torah written by a modern day scribe. I can tell you that in almost every single case, maybe every single case except for maybe Yemenite scribes, that Torah scroll will have columns that are 42 lines long and will be what's called Vavei Amudim. Every column will start with a Vav, with the exception of certain ones, the Yashimo. That's the almost universal custom of scribes today. But it wasn't always that way. And in fact, in the Middle Ages, the Maharam Merotenberg, who you see I quoted here on the left, rails against this Vavei Amudim. He says, "Masha nahagu sofrim borim," the burim, the ignorant or pushy sofrim who want to just don't care about their work. Latchil kol amud bevav v'korin lo Vavei Amudim. The ones who want to do this custom. Nireh she'isur gamor. He says it's asur to do this. And why? Because in order to make it work, the sofer has to lengthen and or compress some of the words so that he makes sure that at the end of the column, the next one's going to start with a vav. So you'll see this actually is true sometimes, especially in older Sifrei Torah. When you get a section that will be very long, so that the next line on the next column can start with a vav. Modern day scrolls do not have this problem because they're using tikkunim, which are already set out, and they know exactly how to lay out the Torah scroll. They don't have to think and guess and calculate. And the reason for that is because of this book on the right. And this book was written in Amsterdam by a sofer named Yehuda Pisa, who wrote this book called Ezrat HaSofer, which was a tikkun for use by the sofer to copy from, which would enable him to write a 42-line Torah scroll with Vavei Amudim perfectly, wouldn't have to do any calculations. This became the standard. Now maybe another day, another class will talk about how unusual that is, that this became the standard, because the Rambam says it's supposed to be more than 42 lines, and you see here the Maharam Merotenberg says it shouldn't do Vavei Amudim. Nevertheless, this became the standard. It got reprinted by Wolf Heidenheim in Germany. From there, it went all over the world, Ashkenaz and Sepharad. except in the Eastern communities, really. And today, you almost can't get a sefer that's not Babam, beginning in the 19th century or so, as it goes on. My point in showing this to you is that today, what we think of as standard was not standard 200 years ago or earlier. Now, one other thing that used to be more common than it is today is something you see here. This is an entry. This is a picture from an entry on called Sefer Tagin, or Tagin, in the Jewish Encyclopedia. We saw earlier that there are certain letters that have to have crowns on them, Shat Nez Gat. It's pretty uniform today. Some letters get 3, some letters get 1, some letters get none. But in the Middle Ages, all the way through the early modern period, and maybe even a little later, there were some scribal traditions which had special letters. Some letters had more crowns. Some letters were formed with unusual curves, like these fays over here, which are called the fufa, or ayins that have special curves on them. And you can see, and the reason for this is sort of irrelevant. All these scribal practices have some basis in midrash, or to show some specialness about certain letters, kabbalistically perhaps, or midrashic understandings of the verses that they appear in. They usually appear in special parts of the Torah that you would, the Ten Commandments, the Shir, but other places too. Now, already in the 19th century, the early 19th century, a question was asked of the Khatam Sofer. Somebody sent him a Torah scroll that they had, an old Torah scroll, that had all these unusual letter forms. Oops, let me go back. And Khatam Sofer deals with the question. This is Al Dat HaSefer Torah Yashan Noshan, the one that you showed me, this old Sefer Torah that was written with Otziot, Tagim, Mishunim, Umrubim, Otziot, Akumot, Ulufufot. The Sefer Torah that you showed me has all sorts of letters that are unusual. Ones that have crowns, ones that are formed strangely, or curved. This is V'hinei Odot Riboy HaTagim Ein Leposlo. There's no reason to make it pasul. Such a Torah doesn't become pasul, because the Rambam already wrote that there was such a custom. Shenahagu ish mipi ish l'tayeg b'kama mekomot. That already in the days of the Rambam, the year 1000 or earlier, Soferim had special traditions of special letters, big and small letters, crowned letters, curved letters. Today we call them otiot mishunot, strange letters. But then the Khatam Sofer continues. The Soferim Shalanu in Ashkenaz in the 19th century, early 19th century, Einam osim shum davar. They don't do this at all. V'yaseasu. That's good that they don't do this. Ki ein otanu yodea ad ma kol ha'devarim ha'mekubalim ish pi ish. We don't even know what all these things mean, why they're being done. We don't have any standard for them. V'lo nizkru b'shas v'nitbalbalu ba'orech ha'galut. And the traditions have been all mixed up in the long exile that we have experienced. And so he says, you shouldn't rely on these scribal traditions. So it's better that our scribes don't do this, even though mikol makom ein le pasul. Not pasul to do, but he doesn't advise doing it. And again, this is not really exactly what I show you, but beginning in the 19th century, in the mid-19th century, or the early 19th century, right around the time that the Khatam Sofer is writing, maybe even influenced by him, or certainly he's reflecting the loss of this tradition of writing special crowns, special letters, that started to go away. And so that's where we get today, that Sifrei Torah don't have these unusual letters. and they don't have irregular columns. Everything follows a tikkun. They're all the same. And the older ones, the Sofrim see, like the one who's looked at our old Moroccan Sefer and said, oh, I'd have to change all the lameds in that Sefer. I'd have to get rid of all these special tagin in order to make it kasher. Because that's what they're trained to do. They don't really realize that there were older traditions, because it's rare to find. But then you come to Shearith Israel. And also part of that rarity is that we live in America, which, for the most part, unless you're in Shearith Israel or Mikveh Israel, communities are much newer. And the Sifrei Torah that most communities have are 100 years old or less. And so they're all almost as identical. There are differences, there are small differences in the way that they're written. Some of them might have certain scribal traditions. Sometimes there's lists of big letters and small letters that get done still today. But mostly, they're all exactly the same. And so Sofrim working today, maybe they've heard of Otiyot Mishonot, but they rarely see them in the field. But then you come to Shearith Israel, and we have 51 Sifarim, and we have a lot of Sifarim which have unusual things. Not just like the Sephardic square script and Gevil, like I showed you, but also Otiyot Mishonot. For the most part, in Shearith Israel's collection, these are all Ashkenazic Sifrei Torah. But you should know that in the Middle Ages, Otiyot Mishonot, these special letters, also appeared in Sephardic Sifrei Torah. Not all of them. In fact, it happens a little less than in Ashkenaz, but they did appear there. And if you've heard of the news the last couple, 2, 3, 4 years, there was this very old medieval Sefer Torah that was identified in Bologna, I think 13th century or something like that. And it is a Sephardic Tav, and it has all sorts of funny tagin and funny letters written in it. So it's not just Ashkenazic. It happens to be that of the ones that have it in our synagogue, they're almost all Ashkenazic. And that's often what they are. It was fairly common in the 16th, 17th, 18th century in Ashkenaz, more than in Sepharad. So here I'm going to show you two. We have more, but I'm going to show you two Sifarim from Shearith Israel's collection that utilize these unusual letters. One of them is up here. We call it Sefer number 40. It's very historic. It was in the synagogue during the Revolutionary War. It was one of two Sifarim that we have that were in New York, in the Heichal of the synagogue during the Revolutionary War. Many of you who know the history of our congregation know that during the Revolutionary War, most of the congregation were patriotic and fled. And the Chazan was Gershom Anisatius, who took the Sifarim and fled. But there were two Sifarim which were owned by people who stayed. One of them is this one, which was owned by the Hendricks family. And as you can see, it has some very special features, like these very special chet, very special phase, unusual letters throughout. I just showed you this part from the Az-Ashir because it has lots of these unusual forms. You can see it here and here and here and here. This Sefer Torah comes from Germany, presumably, known by the way it's written, around the year 1700 or the 17th century. So in the 1600s it was probably written and came to New York somehow with the Hendricks family and stayed in New York. And now look at the one on the bottom. This is called Sefer number 21. It's also known as the Reverend Jacques Chudelayan Sefer because it was once owned by our Chazan, Jacques Chudelayan, in the 19th century. And it was likely written in the early 19th century, although it's a little bit hard to date. But if you may not be expert enough to know, but this actually is unusual for us because it is the only one we have that is the Sephardic Ketav. In fact, the writing of the Portuguese Jews of Amsterdam that has these special tagin, special letters. And in this little section that I showed you here, you can look at this samach. Samach is a letter that's doesn't usually get a crown. But here in this letter, which comes from last week's parasha, 2 weeks ago's parasha, Asurana, when Moses, when God reveals himself in the burning bush, Moses says, "Hey, let me go and take a look at what that is." This letter in the word Asurana has a funny tag, perhaps to indicate that he was going to turn around and go take a look at the burning bush. Don't know exactly why. That's my best theory. But just to show you that we have, most of them are Ashkenazic and of some age, but we also have some Sephardic ones as well, or at least one. And so now, because I'm interested in it, I start looking at it every week. A few of you may have seen my posting on Facebook last week, which I'm not going to get into too great detail, but this is from that Lion Sefer, Jacques Lion Sefer. You'll see there's a space here and a space here, which means that there is a parasha stuma. There is a section here that is left open, basically a paragraph marker in the Torah. But unusually so, the Minchat Shai, who is a commentator who talks about the Masorah very frequently, says there should be none in this place. And yet here we have one. And it's unusual because this is the kind of thing that, according to Maimonides, if you get it wrong, the Torah scroll is pasul. It says that in Hilchot Sefer Torah. If you get the paragraphs, the Ptucha and Stuma, wrong, harei zeh pasul ve'ein bo kedushat Sefer Torah. It's not a Sefer Torah. You can use it to teach a kid the Chumash. It's not a Sefer Torah. So the Minchat Shai in the 17th century said there should be no space here, but some Sefarim still had it, like this one. Interesting. I'm going to show you something from this week's parasha. Now we're in Parshat Bo. This is a pasuk from the beginning. There's the first pasuk. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe bo el Paro ki ani hichbadti et libo ve'et lev abadav leman shiti otzotai ele b'kirbo. God's going to harden the heart, hichbadti et libo, of Paro and of his servants, so that he can send his wonders to Egypt. Now, if you take a look here, the top one, this is the Lion Sefer. You'll see this Lamed here, V'et Lev Abadav, has very unusual things coming out of the top of the Lamed. And when you look closer, you see that it looks like there was also on the first Libo also, but that it got taken away. I don't know why it got taken away, but it was erased here, kept over here. But it looks like originally there was here as well. Somehow this got taken away and this one stayed. Now, if you look at the Ashkenazic Sefer that's a little older, called we'll call it the Revolutionary Scroll that we looked at earlier, it has it also on this Lamed for Libo, though it does not have it on the word Lev Abadav. Just something very unusual. You don't find this in modern Sefer Torah. And what I want you to take note is that these special crowns, special tagin appear, but they don't have the same, they're not uniform in their tradition. One Sefer will have it here, one Sefer will have it here, some Sefarim won't have it at all in this place, but have it in other places. There are Masoretic lists about which letters get special crowns, but they don't match each other. So there's something called Sefer Tagin, which is a Masoretic list from the Gaonic era, which lists all the special crowns by the letters. Aleph has this, Bet has this, Gimel has this, and when you go into the Aleph, it tells you, there's 31 special Alephs that have some special thing. Maybe it's facing backwards or has a tag, has whatever it is, and it tells you them, and then it gives you the words that they appear in, but it doesn't tell you where those words are. So you have to have some seichel to know what it's referring to, and it goes to that the whole way. There's maybe 7 lameds and 14 vavs and 36 mems or whatever it is. And you have to, the sofer has to identify it, even though all it has is one or sometimes two words, and figure, oh, I know which place that is. So you can see that over time, those traditions were mixed up. So somebody said it was supposed to be on this word, somebody said it's supposed to be on that word, and we have two sefarim that are not identical, even though they both have this special tag tradition. That is very common. And now I'm going to show you another one from this week's parsha a little later on. This is in chapter 11, verse 8. V'yaradu chol avadecha elai v'ishtachavu li lemor tzei ata v'chol ha'am asher b'raglecha. This is Moses is going to warn, really, tell Paro that he's going to regret not letting them go because there's going to be another plague, and you know what's going to happen? You're going to capitulate, and everyone's going to bow down to me and say, "Get out of here already, Jews! Get out of here." Say ata. And on that verse, there is a comment by the Minchat Shai. Minchat Shai is a rabbi named Nortzi from Italy, from the 1600s. We saw him earlier, and his commentary is Masoretic. Talks about the Masoretic rules for writing a Torah, and he comments on what he sees, and it's very it's like a critical study. He'll tell you, oh, the manuscripts don't show it like this edition here, and it's from an early modern period. It's quite critical in its trying to establish the correct version of the Torah. And so his comment here on this pasuk is Say ata v'nusach echad me'otiot rabatot tzadi Say rabati. In one tradition of one list or tradition of the enlarged letter tzadi, say this word here should be enlarged. V'chein b'tikun sefer Torah yashan, and also he found it in an old tikkun of how to write a sefer Torah, one that scribes may have been using. Ve'eno kain, he says. This is more important. His conclusion. Ve'eno kain b'shar sefarim. Va'ein mashakulu b'Yishaya. He says in most sefarim, this is not the large letter for tzadi. Now, to just make a more complicated thing simple, there are traditions, in addition to crowns, there are also traditions about some letters that are large and some letters that are small. We have a remnant of that in our Sifarim today. If you look at the first word of the parasha Vayikra, almost universally today, every Sefer Torah will have a little aleph. Otziot Ketanot, that's one of them. In the Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, the Shin is large. The Dalet is large. In Hazinu, there's a large Hey. Bereshit usually has a large Bet. So these are scribal traditions. And in the old lists, like the Sefer Tagin, as well as lists that are in other works like the Meiri from Provence in the 13th century, or there's a work called Ochla v'Ochla, which is a Masoretic list also. They say that the whole alphabet, Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zayin, Chet, has, every letter has one large one in the Torah, and every letter has one small one in the Torah, and they give lists of where those appear. Okay? But they don't always match each other. Okay. So Minchat Shai is telling you that in some lists, this appears as one, but most don't. Most don't. And I didn't copy for you here Minchat Shai's great collaborator, which is a rabbi named Lonzano, who wrote a sefer called Torah Or. Also, going through the Masoretic notes of the different versions of the Torah, and commenting on them and establishing the correct versions. And for that, he says that this does not appear in the list of large letters that appears in the Mesorah Gedolah in the beginning of Devarim, I think, or Bereshit. There is a list in the Masoretic tradition, and this is not one of them. So he says, shouldn't make this one large. This is just showing that in the list given by the Meiri, also Tsei Velamed, Tsei does not appear, that our verse does not appear as one of the large letters. But here I'm showing you something else. This is the book called Ochla Ve'Ochla, also Gaonic era Masoretic lists. It's just a list after list after list after list of different minor things, but which letters are spelt malay, which are chaser, which have a vav, the spelling of this, the aleph of that. And one of those lists is talking about otziot gedolot. You can see here. This is obviously a published version from a manuscript. This was done in the 19th century by a man named Frensdorf, I think. But the original manuscripts are medieval or even Gaonic. And here is a list of the large letters, and it's Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey. And if you go down to Tzadi, it's our verse, Exodus 11. And he writes in German over here when he talks about it. This is now the guy who published it, named Frensdorf, which I translated here. The letters mentioned in the lists have the authority of the Masorah on their side, even if some manuscripts don't write them large. Lonzano and Nortzi, that's the Torah Or and the Minchat Shai, erroneously judge according to these manuscripts, but the Masoretic indications are only authoritative against the manuscripts when the latter do not follow what's given in the Masorah. So he says, what's written in the Machzor Vitri, what's written in the Masechet Sofrim, what's written here, Ochla V'Ochla, what's written in the Sefer Tagin, that's what's authoritative. Not because they found some tikkun of the Torah that was very old that didn't have it. He's criticizing the methodology of the Minchat Shai because he thinks that these Masoretic lists are better. There's no way to come out on that, proving it one way or the other. I just thought it's very, very interesting that he's doing so. Today, people who study the Masorah, like my wife, Minchat Shai is amazing. Torah Or is amazing. They've done amazing work in Frensdorf, who did the Ochla V'Ochla, also did amazing work, but I don't think people realize that they were at odds with each other sometimes. And so now we're going to bring it back to our Sefarim. Before we do that, I just have one. This is a later source. This is a 19th century Sefer called Brit Avraham or something like Mishnat Avraham. But I like it here because he's giving his lists based on much more like known scrolls. So he says that over here he says that there are letters that are large and small in the Torah, and he found them in the Sefer Torah of the Baal Shem Tov, Hasidic Sefer from the 17th century or whatever, the Baal Shem Tov, and somebody else named Shabtai Roskauer, and somebody else named Rabbi Feivish from Zaporizhia. So I thought that was interesting. This is a later source going through, hey, when he's writing, most Sefarim didn't have it. But I have a couple of old Sefer Torah which have these funny letters here, and here's a list of them. Okay. Now let's take a look at what we have here at Shearith Israel. And it's quite interesting. Here is the revolutionary scroll, the Ashkenazic revolutionary scroll, and you can see it has a large tzadi. So, like the list in Ochla V'Ochla, like the list of the Machzor Vitri, not like the list of the Meiri, not like the ruling of the Minchat Shai and the Torah Or. And here is the slightly later 18th or early 19th century Torah scroll, the Jacques Judah Lion scroll. And you can see it does not have a large letter tzadi. But if you look closely, and I don't know if you can see it in your screen at home, it used to. if you look closely, you'll see the outline of a much larger letter that was scraped off and a regular sized tzadi put in its place. Now, going through this scroll, I have seen this happen in a few places, and it's quite interesting. Somebody corrected this place, probably based on the Minchat Shai, saying, well, the Minchat Shai says that it shouldn't be large, so they corrected the scroll to make it match. The unusual thing is that they didn't make the correction where it really matters, in the Ptucha and Stuma, where the Minchat Shai says there should not be a space. I showed you that earlier, but there is one. That one is halacha l'maaseh. If you really believe that the Minchat Shai is the halacha, then this Sefer Torah is pasul according to the Rambam. A large letter will not make it pasul, but having an open space where there shouldn't be does. That didn't get corrected, but somebody corrected this. And that's really what I'm going to leave you with. That examination of the old Sefarim of Shearith Israel is fascinating. We'll show you scribal practices that do not exist today. And we'll show you the lengths that some Sofarim went to correct these unusual things to make it match what their understanding of the halacha was. And that's really what I have for you today. I don't think I have any more slides. Nope. So I'm going to stop the share and let everybody speak to each other. And we'll take a look at what you have in the comments. There is a ptucha. No, actually, that's a stuma. You can count the number of letters and where there's all. Claude, for another class, we'll talk about the ptucha and the stuma of the Rambam versus the Rosh. Not today. Okay. I hope anyone have any questions. I'm sure everyone got everything I said perfectly. It's a little bit, like I said, it's a little bit esoteric, but really what I want you to take out of it is that Shearith Israel we are blessed with having these old Sefarim with different minhagim and unusual minhagim that is hard to find today. And I can just open up the Heichal, roll at it, take a look at the Parashat HaShavua, and see something amazing every week. So expect more from time to time. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's fascinating.
Mhm.